it could have been resolved if, again, AusIndustry and the Federal Police had just done due diligence. If they had have asked the right questions, it's fairly simple. If someone's made an accusation, and obviously for prior art to come into it, somebody has obviously made an accusation that these guys have done the wrong thing. Well, I have a very simple analogy, and that is, if someone's made the allegation and you've got Gary and Greg and their companies demonstrating their technology, everyone's convinced, they give them the grant, and you've gone through that process, and a very stringent process is for them to get to that stage with the grant, then surely you would reverse that and say to the people that have made the accusation, okay, we're satisfied with what they've come up with, you're making the accusation, you do the same.
We had built this, this enormous complex, and yet the allegations were that we had put in a fraudulent application, even though we'd had 5 attempts and 2 physical demonstrations. The allegation was that that had all been overlooked, and then even though we were successful in the outcome over a 3-year period and we'd built this complex, we'd still made a fraudulent application, whatever that meant. But we were never told who made the allegations or why. And after about a 3.5-year investigation, we were found innocent. But I'd lost everything, and so had Greg Shah. We were both bankrupted.
And the fact that the officer in charge at the Federal Police mentioned that it was not to do with the money. It's like we hadn't stolen any money, we hadn't done anything wrong with the money, yet we were being alleged that we committed fraud by taking money from the Commonwealth. So it just didn't make any sense. They didn't expect that they would find a Porsche parked in the backyard, or a Ferrari or a boat, but the guy said to us, this detective said, it's all about prior art. And for somebody to say something that's all about prior art, it's a very specific term that is only really used in the fields of research and development or teaching, or it's to do with bodies of knowledge and the like. So it's a very strange phrase to come out. And of course, it was denied that that was ever said to us when, as we went down the path. But yeah, look, it's not a good experience. Certainly, I was worried then for the fact that they may come to my house where I was living and conduct another search. I was living with my in-laws, and you don't want to disturb anybody. I know Gary's situation and poor Shirl, who was recovering, she was convalescing from cancer at home, and she was exposed to the Federal Police. I mean, all of that is a very, very stressful situation.
My mother died 4 weeks after the raid, 4 or 5 weeks. They'd raided my home with my mother dying. The low point, I guess, she woke up out of a coma, put her hand on my arm, and it was like as though she was just normal. And she just said, "Do not let them beat you." Lay back on the pillow and died. That will remain with me for the rest of my life. That is something that I'll never forget.
They've launched this ridiculous investigation. Who knows what it cost and monetary value and tying up of Federal Police and their assets. 3-year full investigation. It should never have happened. And the problem is those same bureaucrats are still in a position to do this to anyone else that puts their hand up for a government grant. And, at a time when the federal government has said, look, we're prepared to put $1 billion out there to get Australian businesses to come forward, build on technology, make us the smart country, start exporting rather than importing, and we've got the perfect vehicle here, everything's done, and they set about and destroyed them. And the worst thing about it all is they can't even get a letter of apology so they can go back to their associates, their banks, to start again. They've been hung out to dry with no recourse, and it's extremely disappointing, and it's frightening actually that sort of scenario can unfold in Australia.
After the conclusion of the AFP's investigation into the alleged prior art, Gary Price and Greg Shah, with the help of Jerry Raleigh and support from the Australian Greens leader, Senator Christine Milne, were able to obtain documents from the AFP through the Freedom of Information Act. The documents they received were sanitised, and segments of the documents were missing key details and information pertaining to the investigation, masking who or where the accusation came from.
If we really think about the baseline behind who could benefit or why this allegation was made in the first place, it is something that's been dear to my heart and thinking for a long time.
By 2010, I've never received a letter to say I'm not allowed to work on this technology anywhere else in the world, and yet I've taken it to China and America and then returned home. But I've never received any warning or any company or individual to say that I'm not allowed to work on that technology or that area of that technology anymore. If it was so important to the federal government to bring in the federal police, it was so important that I had done such an enormously bad thing, and yet they couldn't even make a 40-cent phone call, and yet they destroyed a business worth over $100 million. I personally lost over $20 million, and it was so important to them to send in the federal police. And yet what's it achieved? We've now got a company importing plastic on one side from China. There's no manufacturing at all. So what was the purpose? And yet I'm still not allowed to know.
I don't know how they've got through it. And for the government to just turn their backs and say, sorry guys, it happens. It's not good enough.
Gary Price and Greg Shah wanted one thing that they felt was fair and that they deserved: a formal letter of exoneration from the Australian government. In 2010, they received a response from Senator Carr's office but were unable to help in the matter.